Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by BetterHelp.com and LittleShaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I wanted to talk to you about decoding the communication of narcissistic personalities. This is not just going to be about what narcissists mean when they say things, but about why communication is so difficult with narcissists in general. Pathologically narcissistic people have a lot of problems with communication. Not only are they dishonest, not only are they manipulative, but they have a lot of difficulty with perception, processing, cognition. Today we're going to talk about 25 or 30 issues. Yes, I said 25 or 30 issues that narcissistic people often have with basic communication. This isn't all of the issues that there are, of course, but we will address some of the most common and destructive ones. This isn't even about higher levels of communication, by the way, just basic communication between human beings. Please note before we begin, these problems are not all specific to just narcissistic personalities at all, and this video is not one of the hundreds of videos that attempts to list endless criteria for determining whether someone is a narcissist or not. This video is about how and why these communication difficulties show up for narcissists specifically. It is not a commentary on the difficulties themselves. It is not saying that only narcissists have these difficulties, because that is not true. And it is not giving a list of criteria for anything. This is a much more nuanced discussion than that. And the focus is on how these things show up for narcissistic personalities, not that these are things that only narcissists have or only narcissists do. Narcissists are human beings, and they often have similar problems to what many other people have, though these things may show up differently, be expressed or dealt with differently, or exist for different reasons. Many times, narcissists create the same difficulties in the people they mistreat that they themselves have. They also often have the same wounds as other people, which is one of the reasons that, for example, attraction can develop in romantic relationships. The growing inability to understand that causes a lot of confusion and upset for people that's really not necessary. It's kind of like saying narcissists eat food, and then everyone who eats food says, "Oh my gosh, I eat food too." Does that mean that I'm a narcissist? The answer is no, of course not. We are discussing concepts regarding the mechanics of eating for narcissistic personalities, not claiming that everyone who eats is a narcissist. That would not only be false, but it would be silly. So hopefully that is understood. Communication is very important. Without communication, we have no way to get our needs, wants, feelings, or issues across to other people. We have no way to get what we need. We have no way for other people to tell us what they need. From the time that we are babies, we're communicating with other people and they're communicating with us. As we grow and mature, we learn to communicate better. We learn to use words, to read body language, to interpret tone, to examine facial expressions, to use context to inform meaning. We learn about how we come across to other people. We learn about how to state things in a way that best facilitates understanding, and much, much more. We learn to understand the full spectrum of communication and how to utilize that. There are many, many areas where this understanding can break down, however, and when it does, there are problems. Narcissists often have major problems in many areas of the spectrum of communication, which can make dealing with them very difficult. A vast majority of the problems people have with narcissists are actually due to the narcissistic personality's inability to communicate and or fall under the umbrella of communication in some way. For example, their style of communication. Despite their very deserved reputation for being rude and combative, many narcissistic personalities have a passive style of communication. That means they often don't speak or respond directly. So, for instance, instead of asking for something directly, they might hint around or phrase it as a statement. Instead of saying, "Can you please take me to the store?" they might say, "I need to get groceries." If someone doesn't realize that this is the communication style, they probably won't respond by offering a ride. This in turn often upsets the narcissist, who assumes that the person knew what they were asking for and just doesn't care or is refusing to give it to them. When confronted, the person understandably says that they didn't know the narcissist was asking for a ride because the narcissist didn't actually ask for a ride, which only makes the narcissistic person angrier. This also comes off as very entitled, and we will address some of the possible reasons for that a little later in the show. Passive communication is a way of communicating where the person does not say what they really want, how they really feel, or what they really need. If directly asked these things, they may lie or deny even when it's obvious. For example, someone who is stomping around the house and slamming all the doors might say everything is fine when they're asked if they're okay. Their tone, facial expression, and behavior are communicating that they're upset and angry, but they're denying it. This is confusing for people and frustrating for the passive communicator who feels that nobody cares. Narcissists, in particular, react badly to feeling neglected, rejected, left out, or abandoned, which often leads to outbursts, silent treatments, tantrums, and passive aggressive attacks like smearing other people. The people who are being punished for their failure to read the narcissist's mind often ask why the narcissist didn't just ask for what they wanted, and to people's endless frustration, the narcissist replies that they did. This is an impossible way to try to communicate, and it's made worse by the fact that narcissists appear to assume that everyone communicates in this same passive, indirect way. They live in a world where no one says what they really mean or how they really feel, where everyone is hiding everything from everyone else. They don't believe you when you try to explain that you really did not understand what they wanted. This is partly because they're egocentric, which means they believe they are the center of everything. Egocentric personalities tend to assume that everyone knows what they mean, what they're doing or going to do, what they're saying or going to say, how they feel or are going to feel, and what they want or will want. When they run into difficulties with these assumptions, and they always do because these things are not actually true, they don't adjust their thinking. They just assume that people know but are pretending not to understand, or that people are consciously refusing to give them what they want but they just won't admit it. This egocentricity does not allow for them to seriously consider that someone really didn't know. They can't conceive of a reality where they're not the top thing on everybody's mind, legitimately the only thing that matters. Because of this, the only conclusion egocentricity allows for is that other people did understand everything the narcissist never actually said, but are intentionally trying to make them feel bad or somehow screw them over. It's a no-win situation either way, because even if you do make them understand that you really didn't know what you were supposed to know, this is then often interpreted as meaning that you don't care about them, which you will also be punished for. As we explored in the episode of the show entitled Narcissists and Cognitive Distortions Jumping to Conclusions, these kinds of assumptions create huge problems with communication. We cannot read other people's minds, and they cannot read ours. However, narcissists often not only assume that you're supposed to read their mind, but that they can read yours. And many seem to believe they can see things in there that no one else can, including you. It's very common for narcissists to tell other people what that person is thinking, what that person is saying, how that person feels, what they're doing, what their motives are, and much, much more. And to argue with you when they're corrected. You say, "No, that is not how I feel. That's not what I think." And they say, "Yes, it is." This can go far beyond gaslighting or lying. They genuinely believe that they're correct. Here again, we see the almost shocking egocentrism of this personality, as well as the level of cognitive distortion. I know what you are thinking, feeling, doing, and saying about me better than you do. I see what you don't see or what you won't admit. Because there's such a strong negativity bias in narcissistic thinking, meaning that they give more importance to negative experiences than positive ones, because they engage in a cognitive distortion called disqualifying the positive, meaning that positive experiences are not just given less importance than negative ones, they are interpreted as negative or not even counted at all, and because narcissists project their own self-loathing and negativity onto other people but don't realize that, instead believing that they're reading the other person's mind and feeling the other person's feelings, their conclusion is that all of the things that you are thinking, feeling, doing, and saying about them are bad, and so are all of your motives. And of course you deny it. Anybody would. No one ever says what they really think or how they really feel, remember? Especially if it's bad. We are all just manipulative liars in the narcissist world. Narcissists also often fall prey to a thinking error or a cognitive distortion called global labeling, which is where they take a word or an action that was valid in a specific situation and apply it globally, meaning to everything. This often comes across as similar to context blindness, because nothing else is considered except what was said or what happened, as if it happened in a vacuum or for no reason. Context doesn't matter and is not considered. If the thing was said or done even 10 years ago in a totally different context, a totally different situation, doesn't matter. It happened. It applies to now. It applies forever. This thinking is rigid and impenetrable. The egocentrism, cognitive distortions, and assumptions that everyone is being dishonest, these things alone are enough to create a wall that is essentially impossible to get past. Compounding this even more is the narcissistic personality's complete lack of trust in themselves or other people. They are paranoid, pathologically afraid of being tricked or fooled, and terrified of being manipulated and controlled, but they don't trust their own ability to protect themselves from this, likely in large part because they seem to have an impaired vetting system for determining what information is true or false. For instance, nonverbal communication plays a big part in helping humans decipher what somebody else is saying, what they're trying to say. Narcissists are notoriously bad at reading body language and facial expressions. People who routinely deal with them report this, and studies have repeatedly demonstrated that they read even neutral facial expressions as hostile, angry, or threatening. This may be related to the fact that many narcissists were raised by at least one narcissistic parent. And, as we see with virtually all narcissists, the parent's communication was likely passive or confusing. Their body language, facial expressions, tone, and other nonverbal communication would not have lined up with what they were saying. This would cause the child to be unable to understand or read these cues accurately, or at the very least to distrust these things and or their ability to read them. People never say what they really feel or really mean, right? This would leave an adult person with an impaired, untrustworthy system for trying to determine whether they should believe something or not. And it seems that most narcissists conclude that it's just safer to assume everybody's lying. That way, if someone is, they won't be caught off guard and they haven't been fooled. This way, they can't be hurt. They don't seem to understand that this actually creates situations where people reject and abandon them because people get tired of being called liars and cheaters and abusers when they're not doing any of these things. They get tired of having to constantly tell another adult that they're on the same side, or being forced to jump hurdle after hurdle to prove that they're safe to trust, only for this to never actually happen. People give up and move on. Then the narcissist was right all along. No one really cares about anyone else, and especially not about them. Everyone is just a manipulative liar. Narcissists have a strong negativity bias, as we mentioned earlier, and it works in conjunction with disqualifying the positive, so they believe that they have evidence for all of the negative things that they believe as well. Things that are neutral or even kind and helpful are interpreted through their own jaded, negative, and extremely biased perception as things that are harmful or selfish or hurtful. After all, everyone is a selfish, harmful person just like they are. Their self-loathing dictates that they will never believe anybody cares about them anyway because they project that onto other people. So they have a system that is essentially set up to dismiss everything as just more evidence that other people are bad, unsafe, uncaring, and untrustworthy. Disqualifying the positive specifically works as a negative feedback loop to reinforce the belief that everyone's bad, unsafe, uncaring, and untrustworthy because narcissists cannot integrate, possibly can't even recognize positive experience that would contradict this negative feedback loop, which means there's no evidence to the contrary. Because of this, it's not uncommon for people to ask, if they distrust me so much, if they think I'm so horrible, if they think I hate them, if they think I'm trying to harm them, if they hate me, if they're doing all these things to me, why do they stay involved in these relationships at all? This is an understandable question, but it really misses the reality for these personalities. Why would they stay involved in a relationship, family, or situation with people they don't trust that they think are out to harm them? Because in their belief, there's no other kind. You look at it and say, if I thought that someone was so horrible in the same way that narcissists think I am, I'd find a relationship with someone that I could trust who I didn't think was horrible and evil or stupid or foolish or whatever. These personalities can't do that. There's no one they trust and they don't appear capable of taking the risk. The relationship is always the same for them no matter what. There's nobody better for them to have a relationship with, regardless of what they say, because they end up seeing everybody the same way. It always ends up the same for them because they don't trust anybody and they very likely never will, not even themselves. Narcissists also have a very impaired ability to engage in reality testing that severely affects their ability to communicate. Reality testing is when you evaluate your reactions, thoughts, and conclusions against the facts of real life to see if they are accurate and appropriate. It's like a fact check. It is a way of helping the ego to distinguish between what's reality and what is a fear or a hope or a wish or a belief. The human ego in general can have trouble knowing the difference here, and it does sometimes need to be checked because of that. A really simple example of reality testing would be that your friend doesn't respond to your text as soon as they usually do, so you start thinking that they're mad at you or that they're upset with you. Engaging in reality testing helps you to evaluate the situation objectively so that you can see that you don't really have evidence for your conclusion, because there could be many reasons that your friend hasn't answered you yet, and the majority of them actually have nothing to do with you. Your conclusion was based on feelings, in this case fear, and not really facts. Because of that, you can see that you really don't have enough information to come to the conclusion that you came to, and that there are many other conclusions and interpretation of the facts that are possible, which means that your conclusion isn't something that you must accept as reality, since there's a legitimate possibility that it actually might not be. The pathologically narcissistic personality structure is not really set up to include that capability. Because of all the things we've discussed already so far and more, the ability of narcissists to test their conclusions against reality is impaired, extremely impaired in many cases. For example, you can accept that there are other reasons a person might do or not do something that have nothing to do with you. Their personality structure is not set up to truly understand this, and it appears to be very difficult for them to conceptualize that this is actually reality. They just don't see it, and telling them doesn't seem to land on them in any way. Similar to small children, narcissists are not really able to understand that other people have lives and motives and feelings and many other things that have nothing to do with them. When they are told this, they just don't believe it. In their perception, it's just not possible that this is true. People are lying. If you think about the first time you ever saw your teacher outside of school, or when you realized that your parents were actual people who have always had lives that don't revolve around or even include you, you'll probably remember feeling surprised or maybe even shocked that they existed outside of how they relate to you and your experiences with them. This is very similar to how narcissists appear to view other people. They don't appear to care about, consider, or even know that other people are actual people who live outside of the narcissist and the narcissist experiences with them. It's not something they are able to understand and consequently do not care about or consider in any way. This is part of what creates the impression that narcissists expect people to simply sit on the shelf like a doll or a toy until the narcissist is ready to play with them. It's also part of what creates the narcissist's egocentric belief that whatever they are thinking about or worried about or care about or whatever is also what is on everybody else's mind. At the very least, this creates a kind of selfish blindness to other people's perspectives and lives. At worst, it creates claims of sabotage and paranoid reactions when people were not aware of what the narcissist had planned or was hoping would happen and stuff like that. People who honestly explained that they were unaware of the narcissist's plans or expectations may be called liars or worse. Narcissistic personalities simply cannot conceive of the fact that anyone has anything in mind but them. Because of this, people often say that narcissists believe that they're gods. That may be how this sort of all-encompassing egocentric mindset is expressed and articulated and perceived by adult human beings, but it's actually very much like a baby, in that the baby is the god, quote unquote, of the household, and everything revolves around the baby and its needs. The baby is aware of its own self and own needs exclusively, and even these in only an abstract, totally experiential way, meaning they're not self-aware enough to realize they are a person or aware of their needs as things which are understood, but only through feeling them. For example, they're aware of their need for food through the discomfort of being hungry. In other words, babies don't think, I'm hungry, I need food, I better cry to let somebody know that. They cry from discomfort because their stomach is empty without being aware of why they are crying. Caregivers hear the crying, guess the baby's needs through trial and error or having information that the baby doesn't have, such as when was the last time the baby ate, and they address these needs, knowing what the baby needs for the baby, because the baby itself does not know. The baby is incapable of articulating or even knowing its own needs, but it also does not have to do these things. The caregiver knows and takes care of it. The baby therefore relies on and proceeds to take for granted the fact that the world will know what its needs are, that these not only will be addressed by other people, but that they have to be addressed by other people, they must be addressed by other people, and by extension, that its needs and self are as important to other people as they are to itself. Indeed, the baby has no ability to conceptualize that anything other than itself even exists in the same way or could have needs. Even if these needs are tended to unreliably by neglectful or abusive caregivers, this reliance on people automatically knowing the baby's needs and addressing them still develops because it has to develop for survival. Narcissists do not appear to ever mature out of these assumptions. They don't appear to ever develop empathy or awareness and consideration for other people or things outside of themselves, and they don't appear to ever develop the awareness that they need to fulfill their own needs and or at least articulate things to other people, because people can no longer just know or guess what their needs are. All of these things are functions of development and maturity. Narcissists appear to still take for granted that everyone knows what they will need and just give it to them, which means if people don't do that, the narcissist assumes that people are being punitive and withholding on purpose. They assume everyone knows what they want or are expecting or trying to do, which means if people don't operate according to that, it has to be intentional. The narcissistic personality's ability to engage in reality testing is impaired because they're not in the same reality that other people are in at all. They're just not, and you can't force them to be in it. They don't see it, and proof doesn't sway them because they appear to be missing some fundamental pieces that would enable them to understand and internalize what the proof actually means. Another thing that develops with maturity is the understanding that you're not always right. You don't always necessarily have all the information, and reality doesn't always agree with how you feel or what you think. Again, this is just not something pathologically narcissistic personalities are set up to do. With no ability to reality test, a disproportionately strong negativity bias, massive toxic shame attached to being wrong, and an impaired ability to vet information for truthfulness, it doesn't appear to be realistic to expect narcissistic personalities to really even be able to entertain the possibility of being wrong. It's just too big of a risk. If you believe you're wrong, then you're weak and you can be harmed by somebody who's just trying to convince you that you're wrong for some type of nefarious purpose. When you cannot trust in yourself and you have no ability to discern what is true or false, the only way you can trust other people is blindly, based on nothing. Simply take them at their word with no way to mitigate harm or protect yourself. This is not something these personalities are willing to do, and to be fair, most people wouldn't. The difference is most people don't have to do that because they have tools that narcissistic personalities don't have. Besides, the reality is, narcissists generally believe they have all the evidence in the world that they're correct anyway. Narcissistic personalities appear to be legitimately unaware of their own limitations, and because of that, they don't seem to realize there could be information they might not have or are not considering. They assume what they know is all there is to know, when in reality, they may be making decisions or coming to conclusions, jumping to conclusions based on very little information or even no information at all. Narcissists operate as if assumptions are knowledge, feelings are facts, and that what they infer into things is always representative of reality. Of course, none of these things are actually true, and the result is that many narcissists end up being told continuously that they're wrong, because they are wrong. When you jump to conclusions based on nothing, or you think you can read people's mind, or you insist that feelings are facts, you're going to be wrong a lot. Due to the shame attached to being wrong and the thinking errors such as projection, which cause them to interpret things that feel bad as always being the result of another person's deliberate intent to harm them, this is just more evidence that they shouldn't trust anybody because everybody's bad. In many ways, the narcissistic personality structure is very limited, very immature, and really can only do a few things very well at all. Imitate and mimic, deny, deflect, and defend against criticism or anything that could be hurtful and damaging to the personality structure, and seek out the supply of reflection and confirmation they need to keep themselves afloat. All of these things are required for the continued basic functioning of what is really a pretty fragile and limited primitive personality structure. These things can't just not be done. They're essential for survival. So most of the day-to-day functioning is taken up with doing them. And there really isn't that much room left for anything else like maturity and growth and conflicting ideas. There's no room for not knowing. And since not knowing is seen as a vulnerability, narcissists are not really capable of entertaining the possibility that they could be wrong. This creates a fear that must be addressed, and the way many narcissists address it is by doubling down and rejecting information that does not agree with their conclusions. This is another big and meaningful difference between narcissistic personalities and those who are not. You can seek outside perspectives without attempting, either unintentionally or not, to manipulate others into saying what you want to hear. For example, if you tell a friend about something that happened and you're seeking their feedback, you will likely be pretty honest about what happened because you actually are trying to test your reality and see if your conclusions make any sense. Narcissistic personalities may also seek outside perspectives, but they tend to relate events in a way that is designed to elicit the feedback that they're comfortable with hearing. They are usually not trying to genuinely test their reality because they honestly don't appear to believe they ever need to do that. Why would you need to do that when you're not ever wrong? Narcissists tend to seek information that will confirm or promote a narrative or a belief that they already have. If this narrative or belief is that they are a victim, for example, they will tell stories that make them appear to be one. This could include everything from unintentionally skewed perspectives to omitted details to conscious outright lies. If they hear feedback which does not confirm their narrative or their belief, it will be discarded or reinterpreted to fit the narrative. For example, if the narcissist narrative is that they are a victim in the situation and someone were to respond in a way that sounds as though they don't agree with that, the narcissistic personality may attempt to reconfirm the narrative to themselves by telling themselves that the person just doesn't understand, or perhaps that the villain in their story, whoever that is, has gotten to this person and recruited them over to the dark side against the narcissist. What does not happen is that the narcissist hears feedback that disagrees with their narrative and they consider the possibility that they're wrong. Not when it's something that is intrinsic to supporting the narrative of their identity, and the reality is that their identity is so unstable that they will use everything they can to create and to support it. Anything they like or that's related to them in some way can be used for this purpose. This is different from other people who use music taste, style, choice, and things like that to express their identity. Rather than using external things as the expression of an internal identity that exists independently of the things seem to be the identity and are not distinguishable or separate from it for narcissists. Narcissists appear to use external things to create and support an identity. They seem to attach their identity to these things rather than the other way around, and are often hypersensitive about them because of that. For example, some narcissists may interpret someone not liking music that they like as the person not liking them, or criticism of that music as some kind of attack on them, even though they did not write the music, perform the music, or have anything to do with the music at all other than listening to it. This can be a very confusing and bizarre experience for people who pretty reasonably don't understand how not liking a specific band or the style of a pair of shoes means they don't like the person listening to the band or wearing the shoes. And they don't usually get an explanation for it because the narcissist doesn't really have one. It's very likely they don't actually realize this is odd, or it's a problem that not everybody else has, therefore they don't believe other people don't understand it. You were definitely on purpose attacking and rejecting them by saying you didn't like that thing that they like. You just won't admit it because you're a giant liar and a bad person. See how easy that is? Besides, they're only reacting to how they feel, and they believe that feeling bad is always the result of someone doing something to make them feel bad. It never comes from inside them as far as they can see it. It's always the result of something someone did to them. Narcissists appear to have serious difficulty experiencing themselves except through the reactions and participations of other people. Therefore, the feedback they receive from others is extremely important. Because of this, and because they come to feel that the feedback and reflections of themselves that they receive from others is always negative eventually, no matter who it is, this makes communication extremely difficult. It often results in the projection, blame shifting, shame dumping, gaslighting, and more that these personalities are notorious for. All of the things we've discussed so far lay the groundwork for what we are going to talk about now. That was part one of Decoding Narcissistic Communication. look for part 2. And as always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via messenger, via email, and through Skype worldwide. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, clinics, and seminars throughout the year. So if you're interested in seeing what we're running right now, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. And if you're interested in joining our support group with multiple weekly meetings, access to exclusive content, and more, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that as well. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast, brought to you by BetterHelp.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day. Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast, brought to you by BetterHelp.com and LittleShaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today we are going to do part 2 of Decoding Narcissistic Communication. If you're not familiar with part 1, you're going to want to check that out. So let's get into it. All of the things we've discussed so far lay the groundwork for what we're going to talk about now. Due to all of the things that we've discussed and more, narcissists' most common experience seems to be that they're being attacked and insulted by other people, so they lash out. They believe other people are trying to offend them or hurt them. There's generally no such thing as an accident or a mistake for the pathologically narcissistic personality. How can there be an accident when you're the only thing anyone is ever thinking about or motivated by, and when you know that everyone is an evil person covering it up by being a lying manipulator who's pretending to be good? Oh, no, no, no. You don't get me that easily. It is all on purpose, and I'm not falling for it. These people are very paranoid because, as we've discussed, they have no trust in themselves or their ability to discern what's true or false, and because they believe everyone is just waiting for their moment to take advantage. They are constantly looking for things that are meant to offend, insult, attack, mock, reject, embarrass, or upset them, and of course they find these things because anything can be made to sound bad if you try hard enough. As hard as it is to see sometimes, narcissists appear to believe they're defending themselves when they attack other people. Though on the surface it makes no sense that we can figure out, they seem to believe they're reacting to some insult, offense, rejection, ridicule, or whatever that they believe has either already come or will come. It's often a preemptive strike, so that they're not caught off guard by the inevitable betrayal of their trust. No one can betray your trust if you just never trust anybody and you just constantly suspect that everyone's going to screw you over eventually, right? Why wait? Why experience the anxiety and the shock and the painful betrayal? Let's just avoid all that and get to the point we all know is coming anyway. That seems to be the crux of the situation here. I know you're going to betray me anyway, and I'm not going to let you. I'm going to stop you, either by betraying you first, because then I'm in control of what's going to happen anyway, or by suspecting every single thing you do so that I'm not caught off guard because I can't deal with the betrayal that I know is coming, and I can't handle the anxiety of just waiting for it. This is why we often see narcissists seeming to get angry when people don't betray them or don't mistreat them. It isn't really that they want you to do those things per se. It's that they know you will or that you already have, and they can't deal with the anxiety of waiting for it to materialize. It provokes rage in them. This is also what creates the impression that narcissists can't just be still and enjoy a peaceful moment. They don't know how to enjoy things because they're too afraid of being betrayed and feeling like a fool for believing in something that wasn't real. Many narcissists will even say things like that if you ask them. They cannot relax. They are too distrustful, too anxious, and seem to feel too incapable of protecting themselves. They can't tell what's real or not real, so they just assume that everything is fake and a lie. That way they don't have to guess, and they don't have to be afraid of being wrong. Remember, there's no such thing as a person you can trust for these people, and no one says what they really mean anyway, so it's not like you're risking missing out on a good relationship by assuming everybody is a liar and a phony. Just assume everyone is bad, and then you'll be safe. This is, of course, disastrous for communication. You can't talk to someone who automatically assumes that everything you say is a lie or it's not true somehow. You can't talk to someone who assumes that you're not saying what you really mean or that you're constantly trying to trick them somehow. This is one of the reasons narcissists have so much trouble listening. Part of it is that they are intentionally tuning you out because they don't believe you and they don't want to be fooled by you accidentally convincing them. And part of it is because they're dissociated and they're listening to their own thoughts instead. They are checked out of the conversation, literally. They are listening to something else and are legitimately not present for the things that you are saying. What they do hear, they interpret according to their biases and through multiple cognitive distortions, so they get it all wrong anyway, but even if they got it right, they have enormous difficulty integrating new information, so it wouldn't even matter. You've probably noticed that even when they appear to accept an explanation, nothing's really been corrected because when the situation gets brought up again, and it will get brought up again, they're still saying the same wrong thing as if the explanation never happened. They cannot integrate what you're saying because they can't integrate new information, especially new and contradicting information. What they think is what sticks, and that's it. You can see this at work in the curious phenomenon of mimicry that occurs with many narcissists, where they repeat things they've heard but don't really understand. This often results in chronically misused words or phrases that are not receptive to correction, no matter how many times it happens. Even with something as simple as this, then, the updated information simply cannot be integrated into the system. It does not stick. You can imagine the difficulty there would be with things where something bigger is at stake. Part of the issue is that narcissists don't use logic or anything else to test reality. If things don't make sense or they can't come up with a logical reason for someone's supposed motives or behaviors, which is not something they seem to spend much time evaluating at all, but which may be brought to their attention by other people, they appear to just assume that there's some angle they're not seeing and therefore their conclusions are still not wrong. So if you say to them, "But why would somebody do that? That doesn't make any sense. Don't you see that this doesn't make any sense?" The narcissist may respond with something like, "Well, I don't know why people do things." Or the answer may be something that makes no sense, or some kind of blanket generalization like, "Because they're a bad person," or "Because they're just stupid." Again, see how easy that is? All of the deflection, denial, gaslighting, and other behaviors these personalities are known for are the result of a desperate attempt to preserve the very fragile fiction they are living in. They have to reject contradicting information because contradicting information disrupts that fiction and threatens its very existence. This cannot be overstated, and it really, really needs to be understood. New and contradicting information threatens this person's reality, which is to say, it threatens their existence. In behaviors like deflection, denial, gaslighting, and all the other things, despite the horrific damage they can and do cause, what you are really seeing is an inept, childish, even primitive attempt to prevent that from happening. And that's obvious if you think about it. How mature and evolved a strategy is it to simply deny things you did or said right in front of other people and insist it just didn't happen, regardless of people having proof that it did? How grown up is it to make up crazy lies about people and spread them around? How adult is it really to basically engage in a more articulate, slightly more sophisticated version of, "I know you are, but what am I?" How grown is it to throw tantrums, break things, or even physically attack other people when you're upset or you don't get your way? These are childish, infantile, ridiculous things for an adult person to do. The very real danger that they present doesn't change that. The grotesque childishness of these things doesn't mitigate the damage that can be done by them at all, unfortunately. But when we can zoom out a little bit and look at them in their proper perspective, it really does show us what we're actually dealing with here in most of these situations. A sort of small, childish, and primitive personality who doesn't know how to communicate, relate to other people, or even function in life very well at all. Some are able to succeed in some things, sometimes beyond all reason or logic, by the way, because narcissism can actually be a benefit in some situations, but their personal lives are usually a shambles, and they are generally unhappy, unfulfilled, chronically angry people who feel perpetually powerless and for whom nothing is ever good enough. That's not a surprise, of course. If we look at their behavior and how they treat other people, their emotional landscape becomes pretty clear. People who are happy and well-adjusted don't routinely mistreat others. People who are happy and well-adjusted aren't habitually jealous, envious, cruel, afraid, distrustful, paranoid. They don't project all these things onto other people. They don't try to shame others or claim that others are trying to shame them. They don't have to gaslight people because it's too difficult to admit bad behavior or a mistake or to be wrong. They don't have to live in a reality that's different from actuality just to cope with life, right? But narcissists do all of those things, and anyone who has spent any time with them knows this to be a fact. Far from whatever they are pretending to be, the majority of narcissistic personalities are terrified, emotional people in complete denial of just about everything, who use inept, self-sabotaging, often abusive coping and defense strategies to navigate life. This doesn't make them not dangerous at all, in fact. The lack of maturity and development makes them more dangerous in many respects. But understanding it does help us not to sort of endow them with more power than they really have. This, in turn, helps us to see them as they really are, which means addressing these things is not as intimidating as it is whenever we see them through the lens that they have provided. Not the one they would like us to use, in which we are supposed to see them as perfect and flawless, but the one they actually gave us, through which we might see them as genius demons or all-powerful monsters and tyrants and whatever. That lens is true in its own way, but it's also false in its own way. The reality is actually very far from that in many ways. These are small, inept, and even gullible personalities who live in a fantasy world because just day-to-day reality is too hard and too scary for them. Again, that doesn't make narcissists less dangerous, far from, but it keeps us from building up or even mythologizing them, which is not only incorrect, but it makes recovery more difficult. Seeing them in their proper perspective also helps with decoding their communication. If you can remember that this is a person who is lacking empathy, who cannot consider other people, who cannot take responsibility for anything because it's too threatening, who is pathologically distrustful, pathologically defensive, who literally lives in a different reality than you do, who cannot deal with emotions from anybody in any way, including from themselves, who cannot listen to even the gentlest perceived criticism because their ego is too fragile and too easily damaged, then a lot of their behavior starts to make more sense, and so do their words, at least intellectually. Emotionally, it'll probably never really make sense, and that's going to have to be okay because it's not going to change. You are not the same as this type of personality, and you won't ever be. So there are some things you're just not going to be able to understand. Count that as a blessing. Many of the things that occur in communication with narcissists are baffling and can make even just basic talking very difficult. As we mentioned earlier, not only do they often intentionally and unintentionally misrepresent and misinterpret what other people are trying to say, they may also chronically misspeak or misrepresent what they themselves are trying to say, because words and phrases don't mean what the narcissist thinks they mean. Because they're egocentric and self-referential, they often take offense to or become upset about things that are not about them, but which they believe to be about them. They have difficulty connecting with their own emotions and feelings, so they project them outwards, then perceive them as being caused by other people or to be coming from someone else entirely. They deflect everything they perceive as even possibly critical or shaming, which is a lot. Many people don't realize how fragile these personalities really are. This results in conversations that go in circles and accomplish nothing, and were designed by default to be that way. They deny even meaningless or silly things, turning every little thing into a personal hill to die on. They defend against things that didn't happen or weren't said. They accuse, attack, and demean. They turn even simple mistakes into huge crimes that people can never live down. They gaslight and pretend things didn't happen, or did. They have no understanding of cause and effect as applied to their own actions or how they appear to other people. They have no empathy, no insight, no self-awareness, no intuition, and no ability to read the room, so they may say things that are artless, rude, inappropriate, or end up embarrassing themselves and then get mad at other people for that. They don't appear to understand or even perceive context at all, either for themselves or other people. They continuously tell other people what the other people mean, what they are saying, what they're doing, or what they're feeling, and refuse to hear otherwise, which destroys the conversation completely every single time. They don't listen, they ignore you, they give the silent treatment, they stonewall, they run away, they blame others for everything and attempt to shame them to alleviate their own anxiety and shame. They project their behaviors and bad quality onto other people and engage in campaigns of shaming and punishment due to their own self-loathing and self-hatred, or to deflect suspicion from themselves. They let nothing go. They give no benefit of the doubt. They insist things happen that didn't happen because they really think they did happen, which is different from gaslighting because it's not intentionally deceptive, even though the effect on other people's is the same. They are delusional. They are suspicious and believe anybody is capable of anything at all times. They are distrustful. They believe nothing you say. They lie because honesty means absolutely nothing to them at all, and because they believe everybody else is doing the same thing. They're manipulative because they feel powerless and need to control other people but can't communicate directly about what they need or what they want. They like tricking people and feeling powerful, like they got away with something. They are paranoid and always assume the worst. Those are just the most basic, common things that can happen with the majority of pathologically narcissistic personalities. There are even more still, all of them awful and damaging. If it has not been made clear to you by now, due to things both in their control and things out of their control, pathologically narcissistic personalities are simply not capable of communicating on any real level in any kind of relationship. They don't seem to understand or even hear much of what's being said to them by anybody, much less someone they feel threatened by, and anyone who is more than a casual acquaintance fits that description. If all you're interested in is the most superficial, banal, and empty conversation possible with a person who has no curiosity, no empathy, and no genuine interest in anything but themselves, then it could be somewhat okay, though you'll probably still find yourself misunderstood continuously, as well as being unable to understand some of the things this person is trying to say to you, and you can't ask questions about it because that's threatening to them. They seem to interpret that as prying, or to take any questioning of them or things they've said as a challenge to them and as claiming that they're wrong somehow rather than an honest attempt to understand. Since they don't seem to possess any real curiosity about other people, they don't understand people asking questions, quote, just because either. If you're asking about something, there must be a problem. You will also find yourself being intentionally mistreated anyway, regardless, because that's just how this goes. It's part of the package. Their problem is internal, but they don't realize that. So the blame and punishment for how they feel goes to the person they can blame, often whoever happens to have the bad luck to be around the most. But if you could overlook all of these things or somehow didn't care about them happening, the communication might go a little better, at least sometimes, if you were willing to be simply a waiting receptacle for their various words and not much else, in other words. However, if you want to have real conversations of any level or depth, if you want to be able to ask questions and have your curiosity rewarded instead of punished, if you want to be able to say good morning to someone without having to worry that they're going to take it wrong, if you want to be heard, if you want honesty, if you want to be seen for who you are, if you want to be believed about anything you say, if you want to understand and be understood, if you want to be able to say what you think, how you feel, and what you mean instead of having somebody tell you, if you want to ever be able to resolve anything that ever happens, and if you ever want to matter, this is not going to work out for you. You might have noticed that this podcast does not include any lists of common phrases and what they might mean or anything like that. The reason for this is because the ability of these personalities to communicate can be so poor that the things they say could literally mean anything or nothing. There is no way to know if they even understand the definition of the words they are using, if they're using them the way that other people use them, if they're being honest, if they're being manipulative, if they genuinely don't remember or understand, or anything else. If you were to ask the narcissist in your life what they mean by what they are saying instead of assuming it means what most people would mean, always remembering that questioning them can be perceived as threatening, you might find out that what you've been assuming and therefore responding to is actually totally wrong. Or that the meanings of things change based on factors that you are unaware of or can't follow, or any number of other things that are not predictable or decipherable. Though it's popular to do, and in very general terms is helpful to understand that they're projecting, for example, it is simply too difficult to even guess what any narcissist might mean by anything without a lot of other information. You would get more illuminating information by asking them directly, though you might not necessarily get an answer. Whatever they might say would probably tell you more about what's going on with this person than any list you might find. Of course, there would probably also be a huge problem if you ask, and the reality is, it's not worth it, not when it won't change anything. The point of understanding how pathologically narcissistic personalities function is not to fix or enable relationships with narcissistic personalities. The relationship will be what it is whether you understand what's happening or not, because the narcissist is basically in it by themselves, and so are you, and you're both in totally different relationships. Regardless of what they say, these personalities are not really looking for understanding in any way, either of you or for themselves or for the situation or anything else. That concept has no true value or meaning to them at all. And I hope this episode of the show has helped you to understand why that is. The point of what we're doing here is to help you interpret what's going on so that you can make an informed decision about whether you want to continue to invest in this situation or not. The level of dysfunction here really isn't surmountable. Virtually every single aspect of communication is impaired for these personalities, from verbal to nonverbal, from listening to getting their own point across, from trust to honesty, down to basic understanding of words and what words mean. It is simply not possible to have a relationship of any kind under these circumstances. If you choose to do so anyway, and many people do, at least know what you're dealing with so that you're not blaming yourself. You will get enough blame from the narcissist. I hope that clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via messenger, via email, and through Skype worldwide. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, clinics, and seminars throughout the year. So if you're interested in seeing what we're running this month, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. If you're interested in joining our support group with weekly support meetings, access to exclusive content, and more, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that as well. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by BetterHelp.com and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day.